things for a big man his size.
Look at that, look at that.
Looking for spun. Can he finish? Here's the tap. Oh my! How good was that? How dominating was
I know a dude, Frank Mir. He was UFC
yeah, sure.
champion. He got hit by a car when he was on his motorcycle, and he got thrown through the air. And he was a giant dude.
He came back too.
Took a long time for he was like really back. You know, like it took well over a year and a half, 2 years before he was really performing at the same level.
Then he came out.
Biggest part of my routine for the psychology aspect is visualization. You know, if you can, especially if you can use multiple senses, your proprioception, your sense of balance, you know, smell, sight, hearing. The more, if you use at least 3 of your senses while you're visualizing a movement, when the reps your brain is getting is almost exactly the same as if I actually did the rep. Now, the advantage to that is I can do thousands of them. I can constantly sit there and visualize different situations in the match.
The lights still hit the canvas the same way. The cage still echoes with the same low roar. But on this night, something feels off. Frank Mir steps forward like he has hundreds of times before. Apt hands, stone face, the weight of war behind his eyes. But he's slower now. There's a stiffness to his gait, a hesitation in his head movement. And when the bell rings, it's not anticipation that fills the air. It's dread. You can feel it, not just from the crowd, but from the camera operators, the commentators, even the opponent across from him. Everyone knows this isn't a comeback. It's a continuation of something far more tragic. A legend who never heard the final bell. Frank Mir didn't lose his prime in one punch. He didn't go out on a stretcher or cry on the mic. No, his downfall was more haunting than that. It happened round by round over years inside cages, on commentary desks, in rehab centers, and behind podcast smiles. Time chipped away at him quietly.
Frank has broken a couple of people's bones in the UFC.
I think I'm probably the only person who's done it multiple times. I've never held on to anything though. Like anytime anybody taps, I stop.
You never have the intent to break it.
No, that's what I think a submission should be. My intent's to break your arm. When most people practice.
Like water grinding down a rock, a former heavyweight champion, once hailed as a submission savant, a jiu-jitsu wizard inside a land of brutes, was now just a silhouette of his old brilliance, moving through fights like a ghost hunting his past. There was a time Mir didn't just win, he calculated. He was the most cerebral heavyweight the UFC had seen. While others swung for the fences, Mir baited you into giving up an arm. He broke Tim Sylvia's limb in under a minute. Submitted Brock Lesnar like he was rolling with a white belt. His IQ in the cage was untouchable. Joe Rogan once called him the smartest heavyweight alive. But brains can't stop bones from breaking. They can't make your joints hold after 10 surgeries. And they can't protect your chin when your neck no longer reacts fast enough to slip a punch. The turning point didn't come with a flash KO or a retirement speech. It came in fragments, in the way Mir winced walking out of the cage after beating Brock, in how he stumbled slightly during a grappling seminar, in those long pauses during post-fight interviews when he searched for words that used to come effortlessly. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. The precision was still there sometimes, but the engine, it was running on fumes. Fighters always talk about heart, about grit, about how you don't quit just because you're tired. But what happens when your body quits on you, while your mind still believes you can win? That was Frank's silent war. He kept taking fights, not because he was chasing belts, but because he couldn't imagine life without it. The cage wasn't just a battleground, it was a home, and stepping out of it permanently, that meant stepping into the unknown. For some fighters, that's scarier than any opponent. And here's the brutal irony: the system that once built him up, cashed in on his rise, and plastered his highlight reels across pay-per-view packages, had gone quiet. The UFC stripped him after the motorcycle crash. Bellator used him to build other names. Triller gave him a boxing match he should have never taken. No promotion said enough. No doctor forced the hand. He passed physicals because physicals don't measure trauma that builds over decades. And so Mir kept going because no one blocked the door. You've seen it before. Legends fighting too long. But Frank's story cuts deeper because it wasn't ego that kept him there. It was necessity, financial strain, medical bills, the cost of trying to be a father, a coach, a provider, and an icon. And behind the scenes, painkillers, physical therapy routines just to make it through training, coaches urging him to step back, friends looking the other way because they knew he wouldn't listen. Still, he walked forward. Still, he fought. Still, he believed. But for those paying attention, the signs were flashing like warning lights on a broken dashboard. In 2016, against Mark Hunt, it happened again. A clean right hand, Mir collapsed like a skyscraper with the foundation pulled out. You could hear the air leave the arena. He was 37, coming off years of damage, visibly slower in every exchange, and now suspended for a failed drug test. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. Frank moved to Bellator, took more damage, lost faster, moved slower. His voice changed, his speech, once sharp and deliberate, now carried the ghost of delayed cognition. In 2021, he stepped into a boxing ring against Steve Cunningham, a former cruiserweight champ with dangerous hands and zero mercy. It was hard to watch, not because Frank was outclassed, but because it felt like watching someone fight with cement in their veins. Sluggish, off balance, visibly distant from the rhythm of the sport he once dominated. And yet, he smiled afterward. He spoke about competing, about pride, about still having it. But the crowd didn't buy it anymore. The YouTube comments weren't filled with fire emojis or legend, spam. They were filled with concern. Is Frank okay? Someone needs to stop this. This ain't right. The same fans who once screamed for his knockouts now watched with their hands over their faces, afraid of what the next punch might do. And this is what separates Mir's story from others. He wasn't out here chasing delusion. He was surviving. Fighting wasn't a choice, it was identity. When your entire adult life has been locked inside cages, how do you suddenly go civilian? Frank once said, "If I stop training, I'll fall apart." And that wasn't bravado. That was truth. The system let him believe it too. No retirement plan, no pension, no safety net. In football, there's protocol. In basketball, there's union support. In MMA, you either fight or fade. And fading doesn't pay the bills. So when fans ask, why didn't Frank walk away? The answer isn't simple. It's buried beneath layers of damage, loyalty, fear, and love. He loved the game too much, loved his daughter too much, loved being somebody too much to let go. But what do you do when your very identity is the thing that's killing you? Frank Mir wasn't knocked out by a punch. He was broken by time. And no one had the heart to tell him. You could hear it before you saw it. The rhythm of slowed footsteps, the shuffle of a body that had given everything it had, and then some. Frank Mir didn't walk into the later years of his career. He limped, but he did it with his head up, shoulders squared, and a quiet defiance in his eyes. Because for Mir, pain wasn't a warning. It was part of the contract. You sign up to fight, you accept the damage. The swelling, the scars, the concussions, they weren't side effects. They were proof. Proof that you endured, that you mattered, but the price, it was stacking up, and it wasn't just physical anymore. By the time Frank hit the 2010s, the audience had already shifted. A new wave of fans, fresh off the Conor era and hungry for knockouts, didn't always recognize the man who once ruled the submission game with surgical brutality. And those who did remember him, they watched with a lump in their throat, because the fighter they once called a heavyweight chess master now looked like he was moving underwater. He wasn't just slower. He was different. The instincts were there, but the body couldn't follow the brain. His head movement lagged. His guard dropped under fatigue. His famous composure in the pocket looked less like confidence and more like paralysis. In interviews, he still spoke like a man with a plan, but when the cage door shut, it was clear the reflexes were gone, and then came the knockouts, one by one: Antonio Silva, Alistair Overeem, Mark Hunt. Each more brutal than the last, the kind of finishes that don't just end fights, they change lives. Mir's chin, once granite, was now glass. His legs buckled differently. His eyes stayed closed longer. And the questions started creeping into every fan forum, every post-fight panel, every uncomfortable silence on commentary. Why is he still doing this? The answer wasn't in the octagon. It was everywhere outside of it. Behind the scenes, Frank was living the reality most may fans never see. The surgeries weren't stopping. The rehab sessions were longer. The nerve damage permanent. Some days, he couldn't fully extend his hip. Other days, his leg wouldn't respond in drills. But the cameras only saw the taped fists, the game face, the walkouts. What they didn't see were the sleepless nights, the whispered concerns from coaches, the pills quietly taken before practice just to make it through a session. And yet, Mir never stopped, because stopping meant surrender. And for a man who'd been baptized in combat since his 20s, surrender wasn't an option. Fighting was more than a career. It was his identity, his currency, his language. Without it, what was left? A broken body, an aging brain. No, he'd rather go out on his shield. But there's a fine line between warrior spirit and self-destruction. Frank was walking that line every time he took a new fight contract. And worse, he was doing it without a safety net. There was no UFC pension plan, no guaranteed post-career health care, no alumni foundation reaching out with long-term support. Just fight, fade, and hope your highlight reels get reposted enough times to keep your name alive. So he signed with Bellator, then Triller. He took fights that didn't make sense. Fights fans knew would end badly, and they did. In Bellator, he faced a similarly aging Fedor Emelianenko, but the results weren't legendary. They were chilling. Mir dropped early, got swarmed, and was finished in under a minute. It was supposed to be a battle of icons. Instead, it looked like a mercy killing. Still, he smiled in the post-fight presser. Still, he said the right things. Still, he said, "I can still go." But he couldn't, not really. By 2021, the fight offers were drying up. Not because Frank said no, but because even the promoters started getting uncomfortable. He stepped into a boxing ring against Steve Cunningham, a former world champion who hadn't fought in years but still looked 5 levels above. The bout was sanctioned, the check cleared, but everyone watching knew this wasn't competition. It was exposure, and not the good kind. Mir's punches looked slow, wide, disconnected. His footwork betrayed him. His defense was delayed. And in between rounds, the cameras caught him breathing heavy, blinking hard, trying to reset a brain that clearly wasn't processing like it used to. He lost unanimously, but the damage went beyond the scorecards. Clips from that fight started circulating, not because they were epic, but because they were alarming. Fans pointed out the way he moved, the way he missed cues, the way his speech had changed. Frank Mir CT compilation started trending on Reddit. YouTube channels dropped side-by-side comparisons of interviews from 2008 vs. Now. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was visual, and what did Frank do? He kept showing up. Podcast guest spots, interviews, cornering his daughter Bella at her fights. He smiled through it all, even as his words came slower, even as his posture sagged. Because walking away, that felt like death. And in a way it was death of the fighter, death of the legend, death of the identity. Frank Mir didn't need another belt. He didn't need a comeback arc. What he needed desperately was rest. But rest is a luxury in MMA, because if you stop, you disappear, and no fighter who's headlined cards, held belts, and been immortalized on posters wants to be forgotten. So Frank fought, not for glory, not even for pride, but for survival, and that's what makes his story hurt the most. This wasn't a man chasing delusion. This was a man clinging to the only thing he's ever known, a cage, a crowd, a countdown to war. The body broke, the speech cracked, the memory faltered, but the pride stayed unshaken, even as the world began asking the one question he refused to face: how much more can one man give before someone finally says stop? In the golden haze of fight night, when the lights hit just right and the music swells, a new name rises through the noise. Bella Mir, young, talented, fierce, a natural grappler with echoes of greatness in her blood. But what fans don't see, what they can't see, is the price she's paying just by standing in the shadow of the man who raised her. Because behind every combo she throws, behind every post-fight interview, there's a quiet fear. Is she walking the same path that's destroying her father? Frank Mir is still there, at her corner, holding pads, watching tape, pushing her through drills. He cheers when she dominates, he nods when she listens, but there's a heaviness to his presence now, a tragic symmetry unfolding in real time. Because while Bella is ascending, gaining traction in the MMA world as a new gen prodigy, Frank is unraveling. Slower, stiffer, visibly worn, she's stepping into the future, while he quietly fades into the past. This isn't just a story about legacy. It's a generational echo, and in that echo is something haunting. Because Bella isn't just inheriting Frank's fight IQ, his grappling brilliance, or his discipline. She's also inheriting the trauma, the lifestyle, the damage masked as devotion. And the deeper she goes, the more that reflection sharpens. She sees it. You can tell in her interviews when she says, "My dad is everything I want to be." There's pride in her voice. But there's also something else, something heavier, a flicker of awareness that she's watching the game take everything from him, and still being told to follow his footsteps. And how could she not follow them? This is all she's known. Since childhood, she's watched him tape his hands, lace his gloves, and walk into battle. She's heard the cheers, felt the adrenaline. But she's also seen him ice swollen joints, take painkillers just to function, forget simple words mid-sentence, and sit in silence longer than he used to. That contrast, the warrior and the wound, that's what's shaping her. Not just technique, but tension, and it's molding her in ways the sport never talks about. Because this is the part of MMA that doesn't make the highlight reel. It's the cost of staying too long, of tying yourself worth to the roar of a crowd. And Frank Mir is the case study in what happens when the sport doesn't let you go, and you don't know how to leave. Bella's watching that play out every day, and while she may be rising fast, her biggest opponent might not be in the cage. It might be the fight to not become her father's ghost. Frank means well, there's no question. His love for Bella is absolute. You can see it in every Instagram post, every teary post-fight hug, every round he corners with pride in his eyes. But love in this game doesn't come clean. It comes laced with sacrifice, and in Mir's case, that sacrifice is his body, his clarity, his future. He's given everything to ensure Bella has a shot, even if it kills him slowly, and that's the part that breaks fans. Because it's not just about one man fighting too long. It's about watching a daughter chase greatness while her role model disintegrates in real time. That's not a torch, it's a burden. Bella's future is wide open. She could be a champion. She's already more polished at her age than most prospects. But around her story is the quiet question no one wants to say out loud. Is she next? Because this isn't just about bruises or broken bones. It's about identity erosion, about what happens when you grow up inside the cage and don't know how to leave it behind. Frank doesn't, and that's what makes this legacy so dangerously cyclical. The cage gave him everything, and now it's taking it all back. Slowly, publicly, and Bella's ringside for all of it. In any other sport, intervention would have come years ago. There would be trainers, therapists, a team guiding the athlete toward longevity. But in MMA, you don't get an exit strategy, you get a contract, and when that contract's up, you get forgotten. Frank Mir is living proof. One of the most intelligent, articulate, respected fighters of his era now walks stiffly at seminars, speaks with visible hesitation, and barely gets a mention on UFC broadcasts. He isn't on the analyst desk. He's not on fighter health panels. He's barely even acknowledged. Just highlight clips and then silence. Bella sees that. She knows what this game does to you when the camera's cut off, and yet she still walks forward. Because that's what fighters do, even when the path is blood, soaked and broken. But here's where it gets even darker. Frank isn't denying his decline because he's arrogant. He's denying it because the truth is too heavy. Because if he admits he's slipping, if he acknowledges the memory gaps, the slurred speech, the nerve damage, he fears it'll all fall apart. The illusion, the strength, the identity. And if that shatters, what does he become? Not a fighter, not a coach, just a man whose body has betrayed him. So he smiles through it. He corners Bella like nothing's wrong. He tells fans he still loves the game, but the footage doesn't lie. And neither does time, and this is where the final tragedy lies. The industry that cheered for him, sold tickets on his back, and celebrated his broken bone submissions, they've all gone quiet. No wellness check. No phone call from Dana. No safety net from the commissions who once passed him without hesitation. Frank Mir gave 2 decades to MMA, bled for it, broke for it, got hit over 0 times on record in the UFC alone. And now, as he slowly dissolves into the background, the silence around him is deafening. Bella is still rising. Her star is still bright, but around that shine, there's a warning. Because when you grow up watching a warrior fall, and you still choose the same path, you're not just chasing legacy, you're tempting fate. And Frank, he's still there, in the corner, gloves around his neck, pride in his eyes, and the weight of 20 years sitting on his shoulders like ghosts no one else can see. The cage raised him. The cage raised her, but the difference, she still has time.